What happens when the price of your survival is someone else's life? At 8,000 meters, human morality vanishes far faster than oxygen. Picture this: 100 climbers, stone-faced, stepping over a dying Muhammad Hassan on the slopes of K2, unwilling to break their push for the summit. Or on Everest, a professional guide leaving an exhausted Nils Antezana to die alone in the dark just to save his own skin. Michael Matthews, Tomasz Kowalski. Everest and Broad Peak became their icy tombs, all because of someone else's ambition and cold indifference. Ready to uncover the chilling secrets hidden on the world's highest peaks? Let's descend into the frozen abyss. People pay a fortune to willingly walk into an icy trap. It's the spring of 2004. The slopes of Everest are teeming with dozens of ambitious climbers, part of large international expeditions. Among them are a 69-year-old doctor, Nils Antezana, and his personal guide, Gustavo Lisi. The trek to base camp is usually just a prelude to the real test, but for Antezana, it immediately becomes a brutal fight for survival. On the approach to the mountain, he catches a severe respiratory infection. The air thins, and every breath becomes a monumental effort. By the time the main acclimatization climbs begin, the elderly man's body is already failing him. Nils loses about 8 kilograms of pure muscle. In the death zone, where every ounce of energy counts, such a massive loss of physical conditioning is nothing short of a disaster. The man is literally wasting away, losing the very resources he needs for the summit push. Common sense and experience point to only one logical step: turn around and go down. But Dr. Antezana takes a short rest and makes a firm decision to continue the ascent. At this moment, the focus shifts to his guide. Gustavo Lisi sees his client's critical condition all too clearly. As a professional, he is obligated to stop this doomed march. But there's a hefty financial bonus on the line for a successful summit. Lisi makes his choice. He says nothing and leads the exhausted man further up the mountain. The evening of May 17th arrives. Gale force icy winds tear through Camp 4 on the South Col. In the pitch-black darkness, the group leaves the shelter and begins their final push. There are 4 of them: Antezana, Lisi, and 2 experienced Sherpas. An invisible countdown has begun. At this altitude, the oxygen supply in their tanks is strictly limited. From the very first steps up the steep, icy slope, the group's pace is terrifyingly slow. A step, a pause, a ragged breath, another step. Every 100 meters pushes them to the absolute limit of human endurance. Under normal conditions, the route to the summit takes significantly less time, but Antezana's group spends a full 14 hours on the ascent. 14 grueling hours battling the altitude and the cold, causing their vital oxygen supplies to dwindle long before they even begin the journey back. The triumph at the top of the world lasts but a moment. The price for that moment is paid immediately. Sometime between 10 and 11 in the morning, on May 18th, Nils Antezana finally reaches the peak of Everest. His life's goal is achieved, but at 8,848 meters, the way up is only a small part of the ordeal. The moment the group turns to descend, the mountain snaps its trap shut. The weather deteriorates rapidly. A brutal high-altitude storm rolls in, and the temperature plummets to extreme lows, turning the slope into an icy wind tunnel. Near the south summit, the worst happens. The hissing from their oxygen tanks fades to silence. The guide and the Sherpas are completely out of the life-saving gas. The altitude immediately takes control. Antezana begins to suffer from cerebral ataxia. His brain, starved of oxygen, is losing its connection to his body. The man loses all coordination. His legs tangle beneath him, and every attempted step ends in a chaotic fall. His body simply refuses to obey. In this critical moment, a Sherpa named Mingma does something astonishing. Seeing his client rapidly freezing, he takes off his own down jacket and wraps it around Nils. Mingma willingly exposes himself to the full force of the icy storm, consciously risking freezing to death, just to give another man a little more warmth. The group struggles down to the 8,400-meter mark, to a small snowy ledge known as the balcony. Their strength is completely gone. Dragging a man who can't control his own movements down a steep, icy ridge in zero visibility is an impossibly difficult task. It's right here, on this windswept ledge, that Gustavo, Lisi, and the Sherpas make a fatal decision. They leave their helpless client right there on the slope. The guide simply turns his back on a living, breathing man. Lisi abandons his charge to the mercy of the elements and begins to hurry down alone, saving only himself. Later, other climbers making their way through the thick blizzard witness a surreal scene in horror. A man is sitting on the narrow, icy ridge. He's in a state of profound shock, completely unresponsive to the world around him, but he is alive. He is still breathing, left alone to face the oncoming night. Meanwhile, Gustavo Lisi successfully navigates the steep descent. Late in the evening, he reaches the safety of the tents at the assault camp. The guide silently crawls into his shelter, zips up his sleeping bag, and immediately goes to sleep. Silence at 8,000 meters costs a human life. Once safe in Camp 4, Gustavo Lisi picks up his radio and says nothing. He conceals a crucial fact from base camp. There is a living man left on the icy ridge. In the death zone, every minute counts, and this deliberate withholding of information robs Antezana of his last, however slim, chance of rescue. As his client freezes to death in the darkness, the radio remains utterly silent. The morning of May 19th dawns. In the cold light of sunrise, the guide takes out his satellite phone, but he doesn't call for a rescue. Lisi calmly dials his mother and contacts his personal webmaster. Soon after, a triumphant post appears on his official website, announcing his successful conquest of Everest. There is not a single word about the fate of his client in this celebratory text. The man has been completely erased from reality. The guide only officially reports his client missing a full 2 days after the tragedy. When people in the camp start asking direct questions, Lisi constructs a convenient defense. He insists it was physically impossible to call for help, blaming the extreme cold for draining the batteries in his radio and phone. But this story quickly crumbles under the weight of the facts. Fabiola Antezana begins to carefully examine the timeline of events and quickly finds huge contradictions in the guide's testimony. The call to the webmaster completely disproves the story about the dead equipment, and the strangeness only grows. When the deceased's personal belongings are returned to his family, a startling detail emerges. A valuable camera and expensive high-altitude gear have vanished from Nils' duffel bag. The renowned journalist Michael Kodas, who investigated this dark story in detail, gives an exhaustive and harsh assessment of the guide's behavior. Analyzing the chain of lies and concealed facts, Kodas describes Lisi's actions with a single, damning phrase: cold indifference. At 8,600 meters, the mountain claims Nils Antezana forever. His body remains among the cold rocks on the descent route. The harsh rules of high-altitude mountaineering are clear. A summit only counts if you make it back to base camp alive. Therefore, this incredible age record is forever erased from the official chronicles, as if the man's footsteps on the roof of the world never existed. Meanwhile, back in the warmth of their offices, investigators can only shrug. Gustavo Lisi completely avoids legal responsibility. The laws of Nepal have a massive blind spot and provide no punishment for a guide who abandons a client in the ice. However, the professional community delivers its own, much harsher verdict. Fellow climbers instantly turn their backs on Lisi. He's branded an untrustworthy guide and becomes a total pariah in the community. No one is willing to trust him with their life ever again. Then, 8 years later, the story takes a completely unexpected turn. In 2012, the exiled guide is trekking across the slopes of Mount Illimani. Among the ancient ice, he stumbles upon twisted metal. Before him lie the wreckage of flight EA-980, which had mysteriously disappeared back in 1985. The man who hid the truth about the client he abandoned on Everest suddenly uncovers one of aviation's greatest mysteries. But this high-profile discovery does nothing to clear his reputation. The tragedy on the descent serves as a frightening example of a complete erosion of ethics, where simple greed completely displaces the fundamental principle of mutual aid. This story is forever etched into the annals of Everest as one of its darkest and most somber chapters. The brutal ending proves a simple truth. At 8,848 meters, human morality can disappear much faster than the oxygen in your tank. The year 1999 would forever change the face of commercial mountaineering. a 22-year-old successful London trader, has just set a national record. He's become the youngest Briton to stand on the world's highest peak. The euphoria of victory lasts only a few minutes. Then, a ruthless combination of nature and a chain of fatal organizational errors takes over. A ferocious storm slams into Everest. Visibility drops to zero, and every movement becomes a colossal struggle. In the eye of the hurricane, a critical moment arrives. A professional guide realizes the situation is spiraling completely out of control. In the thin air of the death zone, he makes a highly controversial decision to separate from his client. At this altitude, the rules of survival are different. This move is a desperate attempt to save at least one life out of two. The young record holder vanishes forever into the blinding snow. But the story shifts from the slopes of the mountain to the halls of justice. The family of the missing climber begins a long and relentless battle for justice. For the first time in British legal history, organizers and guides face criminal charges for a tragedy at 8,000 meters. This kicks off a grueling years-long legal battle that calls into question the very ethics and rules of the game in the high-altitude climbing industry. An elite special forces soldier and a London financier meet on the roof of the world. Michael Matthews and Michael Smith, two men with the same first name, whose fates become intertwined on an expedition with the prestigious adventure company, out there trekking. The group's leader, John Tinker, assembles a strong team, promising his clients the highest level of preparation. But the leading roles in this high-altitude drama fall to these two Brits, men from completely different worlds. Michael Matthews, at just 22 years old, is already enjoying dizzying success in the financial markets of the City of London. He's the face of a completely new wave in commercial mountaineering. The rugged, purpose-driven pioneers of the past are being replaced by ambitious, brilliantly educated young people with deep pockets. They have the money, the top-of-the-line gear, and a burning desire to buy an experience available to only a select few. The young trader already has successful ascents of Aconcagua and Kilimanjaro under his belt. On a traveler's resume, that looks pretty impressive. The altitude there is certainly serious, but technically, the slopes of these volcanoes forgive many weaknesses. Everest, however, demands a completely different level of endurance. For Matthews, the main motivation is the coveted prize, the prestigious status of being the youngest Briton to stand on the planet's highest peak. This monumental goal beckons him, compelling him to write large checks and ignore any internal doubts. On the other end of an invisible safety rope is Michael Smith, a former soldier in the elite British parachute regiment, a man forged in rigid army discipline, accustomed to operating in the most extreme conditions. Smith holds the UIAGM badge, the highest international qualification for mountain guides, the equivalent of a gold medal in the world of professional mountaineering. He has dozens of complex rescue operations to his name. For him, the icy cliffs are a familiar workplace, where cold, mathematical calculation always outweighs personal ambition. He knows exactly how the human body behaves with a critical lack of oxygen, and he understands the price of every single mistake. As the expedition prepares, logistics manager Henry Todd, a well-known and highly influential figure at base camp, enters the scene. He is directly responsible for the most critical resource on the mountain, the team's life support. And it's here that a hidden time bomb is set, turning their equipment into a deadly threat. The team receives a complex, hybrid breathing system. Their arsenal includes specific Russian-made masks and standard Western oxygen cylinders. The design fails at the most basic level. The threads of the two components simply don't match. At base camp, the technicians come up with an engineering solution that is shockingly crude. The metal adapters have to be filed down by hand. Using basic metal files, right there on their knees in the middle of a windswept glacier, the technicians methodically shave off layers of metal, trying to connect parts with different standards. Inside the warmth of an expedition tent, this modified setup seems reliable and airtight, but the physics of high altitude operate by their own harsh rules. Above 8,000 meters, the temperature plummets to impossibly low sub-zero levels, causing metal to contract and deform. The slightest gap, a microscopic crack in the hand-filed thread, leads to fatal consequences. Life-giving oxygen, under immense pressure, begins to hiss away into the frigid air. With every step the climbers take towards the summit, Their equipment becomes a ticking time bomb, ready to cut off their artificial breathing at any moment. An invisible timer is already counting down as the climbers leave the safety of their tents. On the night of May 12th, leading into the 13th, 1999, the final summit push begins from Camp 4. Michael Matthews and Michael Smith step into the pitch-black darkness, lit only by the narrow beams of their headlamps. The young London trader's pace seems acceptable. He moves his feet confidently, methodically inhaling the precious gas through that very same modified mask. However, the clock is ticking relentlessly. For a successful and safe return, this pace is critically insufficient. The mountain demands perfect timing. Every extra hour at this altitude drains a colossal amount of energy from the body. The group approaches the famous Hillary Step, a sheer rock face, the last major obstacle before the summit. And here, the schedule goes alarmingly off track. They pass this point between 1 and 2 in the afternoon. Experienced guides know all too well. By this time, expedition members should already be actively descending back to camp. Breaking the golden rule of turnaround time sets off an irreversible chain reaction. Finally, at around 4 in the afternoon, Michael Matthews steps onto the highest point on the planet. The 22-year-old achieves his ultimate goal and sets a national record. He stands on top of the world, taking triumphant photos and unfurling a flag. Joy completely overwhelms him, but harsh reality is already setting a trap. Reaching the peak at 4 p.m. guarantees only one thing: the journey back will be in encroaching darkness. The moment they start their descent, nature strikes a devastating blow. The weather changes with terrifying speed. The sky is ripped open by a powerful jet stream, unleashing a brutal storm on the slope. Winds accelerate to 160 kilometers an hour, knocking them off their feet with hurricane-force gusts. The temperature instantly drops below -40 degrees. They're plunged into an impenetrable whiteout. Zero visibility completely erases the line between sky and earth, disorienting even the most seasoned high-altitude veterans. In this chaos, professional guide Michael Smith makes a tactical decision. The fixed ropes for the descent are completely buried in snow, reduced to useless, ice-caked cables. Smith moves ahead to break trail and clear the life-saving ropes of ice. He forges a path, spending his last reserves of strength fighting the elements. Meanwhile, the exhausted Matthews is falling catastrophically behind. The young man's reserves are completely depleted by the hours-long ascent and the extreme cold. The distance between them rapidly increases. The thick blanket of snow finally severs all visual contact. The guide and his client lose each other in a howling mountain hell. Smith reaches a landmark known as the balcony and stops. He peers into the white void, desperately hoping to see the beam of his client's headlamp. An agonizing hour of waiting passes. The guide tries to contact the lower camp by radio, but the airwaves are filled with only static and the whistle of the storm. Smith's body begins to freeze. Deep hypothermia is taking control of his muscles and his mind. Standing on that narrow ledge, the former Special Forces soldier faces the toughest choice of his life. To stay and wait means certain death, freezing alongside his client. The survival instinct takes over. Michael Smith begins his solo descent, leaving all hope behind. Michael Matthews is left utterly alone on the wind-swept ridge of the great mountain and disappears without a trace into the snowstorm. The storm winds literally tear the tents at Camp 4 to shreds. Inside the thin nylon shelters, a heavy, oppressive silence reigns. At this very moment, any rescue operation is physically impossible. The brutal cold and impenetrable darkness have sealed off all routes up the mountain, turning the slope into a death trap. Base camp desperately calls for a status update on the radio, but sending a team of experienced Sherpas into the epicenter of this storm would be signing their death warrant. The hurricane-force winds would knock them down, and the sub-zero temperatures would instantly freeze their gear. The mountain has mercilessly locked its doors to any rescuers. On the morning of May 14th, the faint light of dawn brings no relief. The storm continues to rage over the summit, extinguishing any faint hopes of a positive outcome. It is at this grim moment that the words every expedition fears are broadcast over all radio channels. The young British record holder is officially declared missing, lost on the vast, icy expanse. The deceased's family takes the fight to the courtroom, pushing forward an unprecedented lawsuit against the guide and the organizers. The hearings become a meticulous breakdown of every second of that fateful descent. The British justice system attempts to judge actions taken in conditions completely beyond human comprehension at sea level. However, the court delivers a stark and final verdict. The case is dismissed entirely. The defense's main argument works flawlessly. There is simply no direct evidence of a fatal equipment failure on the stand. All possible proof is forever buried under a thick layer of ice. The judge delivers a landmark ruling. He acknowledges that the guide's decision to begin a solo descent was dictated by a pure, blameless instinct for self-preservation. Such a choice, made in an extreme environment, cannot be weighed on the ordinary scales of morality. The trial sets a powerful precedent for the entire commercial mountaineering industry. The law now officially recognizes that, in the thin air of the death zone, the standards of care and responsibility are fundamentally different from those on the ground. Despite losing the court case and the weight of their loss, the family finds the strength to channel their energy into something constructive. They open a major charitable foundation in Michael's memory. The funding goes towards building dozens of modern schools and new educational facilities in isolated Himalayan villages. The memory of the young trader lives on in every building they construct, changing the lives of thousands of residents in remote mountain regions for the better. Decades pass, but the mystery still haunts his loved ones. In 2023, his younger brother organizes a new, incredibly high-tech expedition. He brings in the legendary mountaineer Nirmal Purja and his elite team for the search. The participants are armed with advanced industrial drones, capable of scanning the most dangerous sections of the slope with the highest precision. The main goal of this mission is to finally find the body and bring his brother home. For days on end, the drones methodically comb the deep ice crevasses, exploring every meter of the deadly route. During this exhaustive search, the rescuers do make a chilling discovery. They find the frozen body of a completely different person who had been missing for years, closing someone else's long-standing mystery. However, the primary objective remains just out of reach of the camera lenses. The great mountain continues to guard its secrets, and this long search finally comes to an end. 100 people stubbornly push towards the summit, literally stepping over a freezing young man. July 2023, the slopes of K2, the most savage mountain on the planet, an altitude of 8,200 meters. This is what climbers call the death zone. Here, the oxygen level is so low that the human body begins to shut down with every breath. 27-year-old Pakistani porter Mohammed Hassan is at this extreme altitude for the first time. He has gone there without the necessary experience, driven by a single goal: to ensure his family's survival. Night, gale force winds, and sheer ice forgive no mistakes. On the narrowest, most dangerous part of the route, Mohammed slips. Around him are nearly 100 commercial climbers. They have ambitions, expensive down jackets, and a clear goal. Not a single expedition aborts its summit push. People just walk past him. They look at the man lying on the ground and continue their ascent. No one turns their group around for a large-scale rescue operation. This particular night will forever change the face of the modern, high-altitude climbing industry. Mohammed's body is left on the slope. It is brought down only after a long year. 9 lives depend entirely on the endurance of one young man in the mountains. Mohammed Hassan is 27 years old, and he lives in the remote Pakistani village of Tisar. Life in this isolated valley is governed by the harsh laws of nature, where every penny earned literally determines if the family will have dinner. Mohammed carries a colossal weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He is the absolute sole provider for a huge family of 9. His every morning begins with the search for an answer to the question of how to feed his loved ones in a place with no jobs. The situation at home is becoming critical. His mother is gravely ill, her health fading rapidly with each passing day. The family is critically short on funds to keep her alive, to pay for doctors' visits and necessary treatments. Their harsh reality has no safety nets like easy loans or generous social benefits. All that surrounds them are the mountains. The massive peaks of the Karakoram loom over their homes, a constant reminder of the only available source of income. To save his mother, Mohammed is ready to take extreme measures. Until this season, his career was limited to being a low-altitude porter. His absolute limit was 5,000 meters. A trek to that altitude is incredibly grueling physical labor. Local porters carry dozens of kilograms of other people's luggage on their backs every day, delivering tents and provisions to the base camps of commercial expeditions. However, the difference between trekking at 5,000 meters and storming a summit at 8,000 is colossal. Down below, a person can breathe thick air and push forward on natural endurance alone. Up there, it's a completely different planet, an icy vacuum where survival without special training is simply impossible. And here lies the key fact. Hassan has absolutely no technical mountaineering skills. He has zero experience with complex rescue gear. He doesn't know how to properly use ascenders, ice screws, or safety systems. He's a strong village kid, used to long treks on rocky trails. Professional climbers who scale sheer ice walls come from a completely different school. Safely ascending a mountain of this level requires years of specific training. Mohammed has absolutely none of the time or experience. In the summer of 2023, the tour operator Layla Peak Expedition makes a fatal decision. For the first time in his life, they hire Hassan as a high-altitude porter. To the desperate young man from Tisar, the offer sounds like a winning lottery ticket, a real chance to bring home a large sum of money and help his sick mother. He agrees to the job, completely unaware of the depth of the trap he's walking into. If an independent investigator were to open the expedition's documents right now, they'd find a picture of shocking negligence. The employer grossly violates the most important rules of organizing mountain ascents. Mohammed Hassan's name is simply not on the official permit. Legally speaking, this man doesn't even exist on the mountain slope. Furthermore, the company does not provide him with the mandatory insurance for unforeseen circumstances or emergency evacuation. The most cynical part is the approach to his gear. At extreme altitudes, the right clothing plays a crucial role in retaining heat. A single strong gust of wind can cut right through ordinary fabric. Instead of providing full professional equipment, the company simply gives Hassan a fixed amount of cash. The sum is a mockery. Not even enough to buy a single pair of used high-altitude boots capable of protecting his feet from deep frostbite. Backed into a corner by brutal economic necessity, Hassan is forced to agree to these terms. He gathers what meager items he can find and sets off for the most treacherous mountain on the planet. 200 headlamps merge into a single chain, crawling straight into the mountain's icy maw. The night of July 27th turns into pure chaos. Forecasters have promised an extremely short weather window, forcing the guides to make radical decisions. Around 150 or even 200 climbers begin their summit push at the same time. A massive traffic jam forms on the most difficult section. At the very front is the lead group of high-altitude workers. They are fixing the ropes, screwing in ice anchors, and preparing the way. Among these trailblazers is Hassan, his gear already freezing solid. The clock hands show a time between 2 and 2:30 in the morning. The group enters the couloir known as the bottleneck. Imagine an incredibly narrow ledge with a giant ice serac hanging over it, ready to collapse at any second. To the right, a kilometer-deep abyss. One wrong move on the slick ice changes everything. Mohammed missteps. He falls from the narrow path and plunges into the darkness. The fall lasts for up to 7 meters before the safety rope jerks him to a stop. The man is left hanging upside down over the chasm. The violent jolt has fatal consequences. Muhammad's jacket is pulled up high, exposing his torso to the hurricane-force wind. The most terrible event of the night happens right now. His oxygen mask is ripped from his face and vanishes forever into the gloom. The air temperature drops to minus 25 degrees Celsius. The body is hit with a massive cold shock. The rapid onset of deep hypothermia begins. His internal biological clock starts a countdown, leaving minimal time for a rescue. The lead group tries to pull their comrade up. They pull on the rope, but the weight of a man in full gear is too much to lift. The team leaders make the grim decision to leave him hanging and continue fixing the route above. The clients are following, and they urgently need the fixed ropes. A bit later, a group led by climber Gabriel Tarso arrives at the scene of the fall. These people launch a rescue operation right there on the ledge. Using a complex system of blocks and pulleys, they struggle, but manage to haul the injured man back onto the path. Hassan is back on the solid ice. He is fully conscious, his eyes are open, he sees everything happening around him, but he is completely unable to move. Critical hypoxia and severe frostbite have paralyzed his muscles. The path is so narrow that two people can barely pass each other. From 4 in the morning until sunrise, a completely surreal scene unfolds. A continuous line of climbers passes the prone porter. People literally step over the freezing man, clipping their carabiners onto the same safety rope. Dozens of people glance at his face. Some pause for a moment, but most just continue on their way to their coveted goal. At dawn, as the first rays of sun illuminate the icy slopes, Mohammed Hassan quietly dies of critical hypothermia. He passes away surrounded by a tight circle of dozens of climbers, all stubbornly pushing upward. His body remains frozen in the ice at an altitude of 8,000 meters. Getting a deceased person down from such an extreme altitude requires colossal physical effort and nerves of absolute steel. You can't just pick up a grown man and carry him down a sheer ice wall. You need special rigid sleds capable of withstanding constant, heavy impacts against the rocks. To get them down safely from those steep slopes requires the perfect coordinated effort of at least 6 incredibly resilient professionals, all ready to risk their own lives at a moment's notice. After a grueling push to the summit, none of the exhausted commercial clients are physically capable of that kind of effort, and so the man is left to lie silently in the snow. The wider world would only find out about this chilling nightmare completely by chance, all thanks to modern technology. An Austrian team of professional climbers launches a drone over a narrow couloir to film the epic landscapes. The drone's camera impassively captures a horrifying, deeply unsettling scene. Dozens of people in expensive, brightly colored down jackets, calmly stepping around the fallen porter, methodically clipping into the very same safety rope. This astonishing footage instantly spreads like wildfire across global media, sparking a massive wave of outrage from millions of viewers. Seasoned journalists start asking some extremely uncomfortable questions, and government investigators immediately launch a meticulous investigation into every detail of that fateful expedition. After a tough, months-long inquiry, high-ranking officials deliver their final verdict. The tour operator, Layla Peak Expedition, has its license officially suspended for 2 full years for criminal negligence and a flagrant violation of basic safety protocols. But strict government sanctions and hefty fines can't bring a man back home to his family. His large family continues to wait in anguish for the chance to give their main breadwinner a proper final farewell. A long, incredibly painful year of absolute silence on the merciless slope goes by. In July of 2024, the renowned Pakistani mountaineer Naila Kiani bravely takes the initiative. She organizes an unprecedented, technically complex expedition with the telling codename Honor. The main and only goal of this noble mission is to bring the man home. A team of the country's best high-altitude climbers voluntarily heads into the deadly death zone for the sole purpose of carrying out the recovery. On the most dangerous and treacherous section of the route, where hurricane-force winds constantly rage, they literally have to chip his frozen body out of the solid, clear ice. A single wrong move with a sharp ice axe could easily trigger a fatal avalanche or cause the brave rescuers themselves to plummet into the endless abyss. On the 31st of July, this incredible life-threatening mission is successfully completed. Exhausted but proud, the rescuers bring the deceased to his home village of Tisar for a traditional burial with all due honors. The long circle is finally, completely closed, and the grieving relatives at last have the chance to say goodbye to their loved one. However, the harsh mountains of the Karakoram claim their terrible price for this long-awaited return. One of the most vital members of this complex rescue operation, the outstanding high-altitude mountaineer Murad Sadpara, soon confidently sets off on his next professional climb. Just 2 short weeks later, he tragically dies on the neighboring, treacherous 8,000er Broad Peak. This sudden, catastrophic loss deals another devastating emotional blow to the entire professional community of local guides and porters. The high-profile incident on the slopes of K2 sets in motion massive, irreversible changes to the internal rules of the game. The authorities finally make technical training mandatory for all high-altitude workers, regardless of their previous experience. Regular and extremely strict gear checks begin to take place right before the start of every new commercial expedition. Now, stern inspectors meticulously examine every hired local for quality plastic boots, warm down jackets, and truly reliable safety equipment. The entire global industry of commercial climbing is learning, the hard way, a very harsh lesson about personal responsibility for the people who, with their own hands, pave a safe path for wealthy tourists to their coveted snowy summits. A doctor makes the call, and the motionless body is left in the frozen wasteland. The spring of 1996 on Everest would become one of the darkest chapters in the history of commercial mountaineering. A brutal storm engulfs the mountain, and a 40-year-old named Beck Weathers finds himself at the very epicenter of the tempest. There is absolutely no shelter, and the supplemental oxygen tanks are useless. The temperature plummets to a level where survival is physiologically impossible. Deep hypothermia takes hold, and Beck slips into a coma. His expedition teammates and other survivors check on him twice. And twice, they come to the same brutal yet perfectly logical conclusion for that altitude. There's no hope. He's gone. Trying to bring a man with no signs of life back down would mean putting everyone else at enormous risk. He is left behind in the ice of the death zone. The hours tick by. For 18 long hours, Beck lies in a cold so intense it can shatter steel. Eyewitnesses in base camp have already radioed the grim news back to civilization. But then, something happens that sends an absolute shockwave through every survivor that day. Beck Weathers suddenly opens his eyes. He can see almost nothing. His limbs are frozen solid, but an incredible inner strength forces him to his feet. Blind, relying purely on instinct, he begins his descent toward the tents. The mountain takes his hands and his face forever. But, paradoxically, this very nightmare saves something that seemed long since destroyed: his own family. You see, a successful facade can hide an abyss of despair, one that pushes a person to the edge of the world. Seaborn Beck Weathers has everything a typically successful American could dream of. He's 49 years old, with a brilliant career as a pathologist in hot Dallas, a healthy bank account, and high social standing. His colleagues at the clinic see a confident professional with a great sense of humor and a firm grip. But behind the closed doors of his mind, an invisible predator has been stalking him for years. Beck calls this heavy state the black dog. A thick clinical depression is consuming him from the inside, turning his prosperous daily life into an unbearable ordeal. Each new day in his luxurious home becomes an exhausting battle with his own subconscious, demanding colossal willpower. Psychotherapists know a frightening truth. Sometimes the only way to escape the labyrinth of a fading mind is through extreme physical stress. For Weathers, mountains become that lifeline. Mountaineering quickly transforms from a simple hobby into a form of radical self-therapy. Extreme physical suffering on the verge of human limits works like a reliable off switch. The biting high-altitude cold, the constant lack of oxygen, the complete exhaustion of his muscles under a heavy pack, all this intense physical pain in his body reliably drowns out the inner, spiritual emptiness. In the high latitudes where you just have to put one foot in front of the other and try to breathe, the black dog retreats. The merciless, icy wastelands give the doctor the only precious moments of absolute peace. But this regular escape from reality comes at a huge and very painful price. His obsession with expeditions is rapidly destroying his marriage. Beck's wife, Peach, has been watching the same pattern for years. Her husband chooses snow-covered peaks over the warmth of their home, time and time again. Her patience is slowly but surely running out. She makes a firm, final decision and quietly begins preparing divorce papers. Their marriage is hanging by a thread. Weathers' return from Nepal that spring is meant to be the final chapter in their long relationship. It's an invisible timer, counting down the last days of his familiar world at sea level. Those who were there call what happened a classic tragedy of a goal-oriented loner. In the tight-knit circle of commercial climbers, Beck is considered a strong and very tough mountaineer. He has an impressive list of conquered peaks on various continents. However, there's a huge gap in his impressive resume. He has never in his life crossed the critical 8,000-meter mark. Everest is a completely different league, another planet. Up there, the atmospheric pressure drops by 2/3, and the body literally begins to consume its own resources. Weathers is heading into the most severe expedition of his life, with absolutely no idea how his body will react to such extreme altitude, and it's at this very moment that the main, hidden threat enters the stage. A year and a half before flying to the roof of the world, the pathologist went under the knife for a routine vision correction surgery. Surgeons performed a procedure called radial keratotomy. Specialists make microscopic incisions on the cornea in the shape of sun rays to change its curvature and give the patient perfect, sharp vision. The operation is a brilliant success. Beck sees the world in minute detail and feels completely confident. His medical chart looks perfectly clean. No one at base camp even has a clue about this past procedure, but the thin air and incredibly low atmospheric pressure are about to turn those tiny scars on his eyes into a ticking time bomb. The structure of the cornea will inevitably begin to change under such extreme pressure shifts. Nature's design is unforgiving, and the physiological trap for Beck Weathers is already set. The ice trap snaps shut early on the morning of May 10th during the summit push. The group, led by the experienced guide Rob Hall, begins the arduous ascent to the highest point on the planet. The ambient temperature is extremely low, the wind cuts to the bone, but the real physiological threat lies elsewhere. As they slowly gain altitude, the partial pressure of oxygen in the atmosphere plummets. And just like that, the hidden clockwork in Beck Weathers' eyes begins its final countdown. Due to the massive change in pressure, the tissue of his surgically repaired corneas begins to swell rapidly. The microscopic scars from the scalpel warp, completely distorting his focus. At an altitude of 8,400 meters, deep in the so-called death zone, the world around Beck Weathers dissolves into a thick, impenetrable white fog. He goes almost completely blind, right there on a steep, wind-blasted slope, where a single misstep means a certain plunge into the abyss. The other climbers notice with alarm how Weathers is just shuffling in place, his hands held out in front of him. Expedition leader Rob Hall instantly grasps the severity of the situation. He strictly forbids his client, who is rapidly losing his sight, from going any higher. Hall gives a clear, non-negotiable order. Stay exactly where you are and wait for the group to summit and pick you up on the way back down. Weathers, a disciplined man, obediently sits down in the snow, following his leader's command. This begins the agonizingly long hours of waiting in the piercing, high-altitude wind. During the day, other climbers pass Beck on their slow descent. They see the lone, seated figure and offer to help, but Weathers firmly refuses. He gave his word to wait for his guide and has complete faith that Hall will appear over the ridge any moment. His trust in his leader overrides his instinct for self-preservation. But Rob Hall is destined to remain on that mountain forever. As evening falls, the situation spirals completely out of control. Another guide, Mike Groom, discovers a severely freezing Beck, decisively gets him moving, and they begin a tortuously slow descent. It's at this exact moment that a hurricane of unprecedented force slams into Everest. Visibility instantly drops to absolute zero. The group of exhausted climbers loses their way, wandering chaotically in the blizzard until their last reserves of strength are gone. In total darkness, they are forced to lie down on the ice, huddling together, clinging to one another to preserve what little warmth they have left in the roaring, raging storm. Late that night, a guide from another team, Anatoly Bukrev, pushes through the hurricane-force winds. In a feat of impossible physical endurance, he drags several people back to camp, one by one. By this point, however, Weathers is in a deep comatose state. It's impossible to drag him across the icy rocks alone in these conditions. Beck is left for dead in the howling, snowy darkness. The morning of May 11th arrives. The expedition's doctor, Stuart Hutchison, heads out with the Sherpas to search for the missing. They find bodies buried in the snow. Hutchison, a professional, examines Weathers. The patient's breathing is barely perceptible. His pulse is almost non-existent, and his pupils are fixed and dilated. The doctor diagnoses an irreversible hypothermic coma. The pathologist from Dallas is officially declared dead. A heavy, emotionless message is radioed down to base camp, reporting the loss. But then, the mountain suddenly breaks all the known laws of biology. Around 4 in the afternoon, something completely anomalous happens. Inside the frozen solid body, a spark of life suddenly ignites. Beck Weathers opens his eyes. He sees his right hand in front of him, and it looks like a piece of gray frozen marble. Incredibly, his mind clears. A powerful primal survival instinct forces him to do the impossible. He gets up on his frozen legs. Completely blind, brutally frostbitten, and stripped of all hope for rescue, he starts to walk. He chooses a direction intuitively, relying solely on some internal compass. And against all odds, this ghost of a man walks straight to the tents of the high-altitude camp, stunning every single survivor into silent shock. This living corpse stumbles into camp, plunging the surviving climbers into a state of absolute horror. People stare at Beck Weathers with wide eyes, refusing to believe what they are seeing. The tents are in total disarray. Physical and mental exhaustion paralyzes everyone's movements. His companions manage to drag Beck into a surviving shelter, trying to warm him up, but they barely have enough energy to maintain their own body heat. In the midst of the chaos and extreme fatigue, the zipper on his sleeping bag is done up carelessly. Huge gaps are left open to the piercing, icy draft. Another monstrous, endless night begins. Everest continues its cruel test of human endurance. The hurricane-force wind furiously tears at the thin fabric of the tent, and the temperature remains at critically low, sub-zero levels. Weathers desperately screams for help through the deafening howl of the storm, but his hoarse cries are completely swallowed by the roar of the elements. The neighboring tents are silent. He is once again left alone with the merciless cold, balancing on the razor's edge of existence. A life-saving dawn finally breaks. Incredibly, Beck is still breathing. His internal engine stubbornly keeps running. Now, the surviving members of the expedition face a seemingly impossible task: to get a completely immobilized and severely injured man down to a safe zone. Every step on the steep, mirror-like ice slopes is pure torture. Supported by other climbers, Weathers agonizingly covers vertical meters. They miraculously reach the 6,400-meter mark, descending into a glacial basin. Walking any further is simply impossible. The body's meager reserves have been depleted to the very bottom. The clock is ticking. The Nepalese Army's aviation unit is called into action. An experienced pilot, Madan Khatri Chetri, receives the urgent distress call. He instantly assesses the parameters and understands perfectly. The air at such an extreme altitude is too thin for standard maneuvers. The helicopter risks simply falling into the abyss without proper aerodynamic lift. Madan makes an unprecedentedly risky decision. Down below, mechanics strip the helicopter down to its bare minimum, ruthlessly removing every single non-essential piece of equipment and cabin parts. Risking his own life, the pilot guides the machine toward the dazzling white slopes. This desperate flight will go down in aviation history. The rotor blades struggle to grip the thin air. Madan masterfully balances on the very edge of the machine's technical limits and successfully retrieves Beck. This daring maneuver becomes the second highest helicopter rescue in human history. Far below, a completely different battle begins. A quiet, but no less intense one. Within the walls of modern clinics, doctors assess the full scale of the high-altitude damage. The frost has taken too much. Surgeons perform complex amputations. Weathers loses his right arm, all the fingers on his left hand, and significant portions of both feet. His face was also critically damaged by the ice storm. To restore the patient's ability to breathe normally and improve his appearance, plastic surgeons use a revolutionary technique. They literally grow a new nose on Beck's forehead, using his own tissue. Later, a painstaking operation follows to move this new organ to its proper place. The speed of his subsequent recovery stuns even the most skeptical doctors. Just 4 short months after the devastating surgeries, the indomitable pathologist returns to his regular job. He is once again looking into a microscope, using special mechanical attachments for his hands. The mountain takes so much, but paradoxically, it gives him back his real life. The catastrophe completely and permanently shatters Weathers' old, rigid egocentrism. That inner black dog of severe depression is frozen forever in the snows of the Himalayas. His miraculous return from the dead brings him and his wife back together, stopping the inevitable collapse of their marriage. Peach stays with him, and they start their journey over from a clean slate. And the world learns a harsh, unforgettable lesson. Beck's case proves irrefutably. Hiding any medical procedures before entering extreme environments poses a fatal threat. A threat the mountains will never forgive. A climber is officially declared dead at an altitude of 8,700 meters. Trapped on Everest without a sleeping bag or oxygen, survival is simply impossible. The cold cuts to the bone. Hope is fading, but as the first rays of morning sun appear, the Australian Lincoln Hall opens his eyes. A rescue team finds him alive, in a place where people usually stay forever. This incredible event shocks the world and forces the global community to completely rethink the harsh rules of commercial expeditions. The distinguished athlete achieves the absolutely impossible. He cheats death in the most brutal place on Earth. But the end of this story holds a cruel paradox. Lincoln receives his true death sentence in complete safety, long before he ever saw the world's highest mountains. The simple act of building wooden garden sheds in his backyard turns out to be a fatal mistake. The air fills with invisible asbestos dust. It settles in his lungs, and decades later, it takes the life of a man that even the world's most merciless peak couldn't break. Before Everest would try to claim him for good, Lincoln Ross Hall had a long journey to the top of the world. In 1955, in Canberra, the story of a future legend begins. Sunny, flat Australia seems like a completely unsuitable place for harsh ice climbing. However, while studying at the prestigious Australian National University, Lincoln discovers a whole different world. Rocks, ice axes, and climbing ropes quickly push aside dull academic lectures. The mountains become a powerful magnet with an incredible pull. Hall trains relentlessly on local rocky ridges, eagerly honing his technical skills and preparing seriously for the real tests to come. He has no idea yet of the immense physical price he would have to pay for his boundless passion for high altitude. His first serious test of strength comes in 1978, the Indian Himalayas, the Dunagiri Massif. The altitude exceeds the 7,000-meter mark. The expedition suddenly goes off plan, and Lincoln finds himself in a truly critical situation. He's forced to spend a long, dark night on an open, windswept mountain ridge with absolutely no bivouac gear. The air temperature plummets to critical levels, and a piercing, icy wind cuts right through his storm gear. His fellow climbers below stare into the night sky with growing anxiety, hoping for a safe outcome. Hall miraculously survives that terrifying night, demonstrating incredible inner fortitude and physical endurance. But the harsh high-altitude frost leaves its cruel mark forever. Due to severe frostbite, Lincoln loses parts of his toes. For many professional athletes, such a physical loss would mean an immediate and final retirement from the sport. But Hall was just hitting his stride. 5 years pass, and he once again boldly challenges the wild forces of nature. In 1983, the Australian climber accomplishes something truly phenomenal. He and his tight-knit team forge a brand new path up the south face of Annapurna 2. Picture a gigantic sheer vertical wall of solid ice and rock, almost 8 kilometers high. The group ascends where no human had ever set foot before. This brilliant first ascent forever inscribes Lincoln Hall's name in the golden history of world mountaineering. He proves to the skeptics that climbers from hot Australia could compete on equal footing with the world's best. In 1984, the time comes to challenge the main mountain on Earth. Lincoln joins a historic expedition to Everest. The Australian team sets an incredibly ambitious goal to pioneer a new route up the dangerous North Face, and they're doing it without the use of supplemental oxygen. The climbers struggle to breathe the extremely thin air. Every single step at this altitude requires colossal physical effort. Hall pushes on through gale force headwinds and bone-chilling cold. The coveted summit is just a few hundred meters ahead. The goal of a lifetime is literally within arm's reach. At that very moment, he reaches his absolute breaking point. Lincoln clearly feels the signs of profound hypothermia and recognizes his own extreme exhaustion. Journalists would later write about the incredible willpower and common sense it took to make such a difficult choice, just one step away from absolute triumph. Hall makes the toughest decision of his career, to turn around and head down, leaving his cherished dream right before his eyes. He consciously chooses his own life. This priceless experience makes him much wiser and more cautious. After a series of grueling Himalayan expeditions, Hall confidently transitions into the role of a professional mountain guide. He safely leads people into the high mountains, ensuring their security on the most complex and risky sections of terrain. At the same time, Lincoln discovers a brilliant talent for writing, regularly publishing fascinating books about his thrilling adventures and acting as the lead organizer for major international expeditions. 22 years later, Everest finally demands its brutal revenge. In 2006, Lincoln Hall returns to the slopes of the world's highest peak, this time as part of a large commercial expedition. The mountains have long since become an industry, but their harsh nature remains unchanged. On the morning of the 25th of May, his dream comes true. He successfully reaches the very top, taking deep breaths of the life-saving mixture from his oxygen cylinder. The entire world lies at his feet. The triumph on the summit lasts only a few moments. The cardinal rule of high-altitude mountaineering is that the climb only ends back at base camp. Now, the descent begins, and the mountain slams its icy trap shut. At an altitude of about 8,700 meters, disaster strikes. This treacherous territory is called the death zone, a place where the human body simply refuses to function, and every second relentlessly consumes its resources. An invisible timer begins its countdown. Lincoln suddenly loses his coordination. His confident steps become shaky. His legs buckle on the narrow rocky ridge. Inside his skull, a formidable enemy is rapidly developing, a severe case of high-altitude cerebral edema. In simple terms, due to the massive pressure change and critical lack of oxygen, the brain literally swells up like a sponge soaking up water. It begins to crush itself inside the cranium. The nervous system fails, sending chaotic signals. Reality completely dissolves, and Hall begins to suffer from severe hallucinations. He talks to invisible companions, losing all connection with the harsh material world around him. With him are 3 experienced Sherpas. These incredibly resilient high-altitude guides engage in a desperate, hours-long battle for their client's life. Picture it, 3 exhausted men trying to drag, push, and lower a completely immobilized large man. They are balancing on a narrow, icy ledge where one wrong step leads to a bottomless abyss, and their lungs burn with fire from every single breath. Their strength is fading fast. The ferocious Himalayan wind intensifies, hurling sharp, icy pellets into their faces. Pitch-black darkness descends on the mountain. The group's supply of supplemental oxygen is completely depleted. The cylinders run empty one after another. In the brutal blizzard, the Sherpas begin to suffer from snow blindness. Their eyes become inflamed, and they can no longer see through the whiteout. The situation becomes absolutely critical. Over a crackling radio, the guides contact the expedition leader, who is far below in the relative safety of base camp. The moment for the hardest, coldest choice has arrived. After weighing all the ruthless facts, the leader gives a brutal but mathematically precise command. He orders them to leave Hall on the ridge. If the Sherpas continue this hopeless descent with him, the mountain will inevitably claim all 4 of them. They must save their own lives while they can still move. At 7:30 p.m. local time, the terrible news is broadcast across all radio frequencies. Lincoln Hall is officially declared dead. On the other side of the world, his family receives the most tragic news imaginable. And at an altitude of 8.5 kilometers, the final act of this icy drama unfolds. The Australian climber is left completely alone in the kingdom of eternal ice. No shelter, no tent, no sleeping bag. The ambient temperature plummets to below -25 degrees Celsius. The piercing wind blows straight through his multiple layers of clothing. His freezing body enters the final, most paradoxical stage of hypothermia. His nerve endings fail, and his freezing brain sends false signals. The person suddenly feels unbearably hot, as if they are burning in a fire. Obeying this fatal instinct, Hall unzips his warm-down suit and throws his thick protective gloves into the snow. He is left with his head uncovered and his hands bare, completely defenseless against the cosmic cold and the long night ahead. The first rays of dawn illuminate a frozen silhouette on the deadly rock ridge. The morning of the 26th of May begins for Everest just like any other day, until a group led by American guide Dan Mazur, pushing hard through the icy fog towards the summit. At 8,600 meters, their eyes catch a splash of bright color. Sitting right on the narrow trail is a man. His down jacket is wide open. He has no protective gloves. Mazer swallows hard, the dry, frosty air catching in his throat. In front of them is another frozen traveler, a silent monument to human ambition. Suddenly, the figure slowly turns its head. The crust of ice on its face cracks, the frozen lips part, and a phrase is spoken, utterly absurd, unbelievable for this place. "I suppose you're a bit surprised to see me here." Everest immediately confronts Mazer's team with a brutal moral choice. The coveted summit is just a few hours of grueling work away. Years of exhausting training have been spent. A massive financial investment has been made. Other commercial expeditions pass by indifferently, methodically digging their crampons into the hard-packed snow, averting their eyes from the seated Australian. But Mazur's group makes a completely different decision. They exchange a silent glance and turn their backs on their ultimate dream forever. A desperate race against time begins. The rescuers carefully warm Lincoln with hot tea and, without a second thought, connect him to their own spare tanks of life-giving oxygen. An invisible timer ticks loudly, counting down the seconds. Hall's exhausted body is teetering on a razor's edge. His internal systems could fail completely at any moment. Bringing a large, nearly immobilized man down from such an extreme altitude is physically impossible for one small group. Gravity and the vacuum of the high peaks are playing against them. An urgent, frantic call for help crackles over the radio to the camps below. What follows is a true miracle of logistics and self-sacrifice. From the lower assault camps, an unprecedented full-scale rescue operation is launched. 12 incredibly strong Nepalese Sherpas abandon their current tasks and rush upward through the intensifying hurricane-force winds. They form a continuous living conveyor belt. Carefully, step by step, they pull Hall out of the death zone, risking a fall into a bottomless, kilometer-deep abyss with every wrong move. The harsh mountain still exacts its cruel toll for this audacious resurrection. Due to deep tissue necrosis, Lincoln Hall loses the tips of his fingers and toes. Nevertheless, he achieves an absolute miracle. He returns to civilization alive. This transcendent experience completely reshapes his consciousness. Back home, the mountaineer releases a stunning best-selling book about his lonely night on the roof of the world. He soon co-founds a major charitable foundation, dedicating all his energy to helping the people of the Himalayas. Exactly 5 years pass, and fate delivers a devastating blow from a completely unexpected direction. In 2011, doctors deliver a merciless verdict, a rare form of mesothelioma. The roots of this terrible disease stretch far back into his past. In his youth, while helping to build simple wooden garden sheds, Lincoln often inhaled fine asbestos dust. It was these invisible, microscopic particles from a safe suburb, not the deadly cosmic cold of Everest, that had been quietly destroying him from the inside for decades. On March 20th, 2012, the legendary Australian climber passes away in a comfortable Sydney hospital room. His incredible rescue on the slopes of Chomolungma leaves the world with a powerful and bright legacy. This story proves, once and for all, to all of humanity. Even at the most extreme altitudes, where harsh pragmatism and cold financial calculation usually rule the day, genuine human compassion can triumph over cold commerce. The 12th highest mountain on the planet is preparing to devour its conquerors. The calendar reads March 2013. And a Polish team is on the verge of a historic breakthrough. The Winter Broad Peak, a formidable giant in the Karakoram Range, is finally yielding to human will. This expedition is intended to be an absolute, unconditional triumph for their national mountaineering program. Winter ascents of 8,000ers are considered the major leagues, the very edge of human capability, a field where the Poles have historically been the main pioneers. And now, the summit is conquered. The radios transmit the long-awaited words of victory to base camp. But at this altitude, euphoria evaporates with the setting sun. The journey down proves to be far more terrifying than the ascent itself. A resounding success rapidly turns into one of the darkest catastrophes in the history of high-altitude climbing. During the descent in the icy darkness, 2 men from completely different worlds are lost forever. Maciej Berbeka, a highly experienced veteran climbing this mountain to correct a specific mistake from his past, and Tomasz Kowalski, a young, incredibly resilient athlete who overestimated his own reserves of strength in the face of the winter Karakoram. A merciless winter night at 8,000 meters claims both lives and erases all ambition. The tragedy of this team later sparks an incredibly harsh, painful ethical debate within the global sports community. People begin to fiercely argue about the boundaries of humanity, mutual duty, and the true price of a historic record. The story of the Broad Peak expedition proves one undeniable fact, brutally and directly. The mountain is utterly indifferent to national flags and ambitious projects, and violating the basic laws of survival at such an altitude always has fatal consequences. For a quarter of a century, a man has carried a mountain inside him, a mountain that once deceived him. At the Broad Peak Base Camp, a truly unique team is now assembling, bringing together two completely different poles of mountaineering. On one side, the grizzled veterans of the old school, true ice warriors forged in the harsh expeditions of the 80s. On the other, the young guns of the modern athletic approach, accustomed to scientific methods, GPS trackers, and speed ascents. The team appears to be a perfect blend of experience and youth, but beneath the surface lies a vast difference in mentality. The focus of the press and his peers is on Maciej Berbeka, a 58-year-old legendary mountaineer, a highly experienced mountain rescuer, and a participant in the greatest historical expeditions. Journalists often try to understand his motivation for returning to these harsh conditions. The answer lies deep in his past and echoes with personal pain. Back in 1988, Berbeka made an incredible winter ascent right here, on Broad Peak. He fought through a storm, reached what he thought was the highest point, turned around, and descended a hero. But sometime later, experts carefully analyzed the photographs and delivered a harsh verdict. Due to the blizzard and zero visibility, Berbeka had stopped at the so-called Rocky Summit, a sub-peak. The main summit was just an hour's traverse along a rocky ridge away, but the moment was lost. The realization of this mistake became a heavy blow. Returning to the mountain's slope after 25 years has become a personal crusade for Maciej. He's going up to put an old, painful ghost to rest. Next to the seasoned veteran, Tomasz Kowalski is preparing for the climb. He is 27 years old, radiating incredible energy and absolute self-confidence. Tomasz is a successful ultramarathon runner. On the summer 7,000ers of the Pamir and Tian Shan ranges, he consistently demonstrates phenomenal endurance, easily outpacing his older comrades on steep slopes. Sports doctors have recorded outstanding performance metrics for his body. However, his brilliant resume has a gaping hole. The young athlete has absolutely no experience on 8,000ers, especially during the merciless winter season. The winter Karakoram is fundamentally different from any summer mountain range. Temperatures plummet to minus 40 degrees, and hurricane-force winds suck the heat out of you in an instant. In these conditions, pure athletic endurance gives way to the gritty, monotonous ability of the human body to function under critical exhaustion. The difference between the two climbers lays a solid foundation for the events to come. The veterans know how to listen to the mountain, to slow their pace, to conserve every last bit of energy. The youth operate at maximum heart rate, trusting in their flawless physical condition. Berbeka carries the invisible weight of a past failure, compelling him to push stubbornly forward. Kowalski relies completely on his youth and health. Experienced mountain guides often note that the physiology of a 58-year-old rescuer and a 27-year-old runner reacts completely differently to extreme oxygen deprivation. They have different backgrounds, different motives, and different mechanisms for adapting to stress. They share a tent, but internally they are on two completely separate expeditions. Amidst these deep contradictions, the group simply continues to prepare for the final push. The clock is ticking, counting down the seconds to a fatal mistake on the icy slope. March 5th begins with a fatal delay, derailing the original plans. The team of 4 climbers leaves the assault camp at 5:15 in the morning. For a winter climb in the Karakoram, starting this late is basically a death sentence. The sun rises late, the daylight is catastrophically short, and a huge and technically complex route lies ahead. When analyzing this situation, high-altitude climbing experts are left shaking their heads. The group violates a fundamental rule of survival on 8,000ers. The climbers simply ignore the need to set a hard deadline, a mandatory turnaround time. Usually, climbers agree to turn back at 2 in the afternoon, sharp, regardless of how close they are to the peak. Today, the thirst for a historic victory blinds all of them. Broad Peak beckons with its proximity, making them forget all caution. Time slips away relentlessly as the team stubbornly crawls upward through the biting cold, burning colossal amounts of internal energy with every step. The hands of the clock cross 17:20, 5:20 p.m. Adam Bilecki, the fastest and most physically fit member of the group, is the first to set foot on the coveted summit. The historic triumph is finally a reality. But the euphoria lasts for just a few fleeting moments. Adam scans his surroundings, sizes up the encroaching dusk, and makes a brutally pragmatic decision. He starts the descent immediately, completely alone. No waiting for his teammates, no attempt to stick together. Bilecki knows the cold is about to become critical. The unified team suddenly ceases to exist, shattering into individuals scattered across a giant mountain. The sun plummets below the horizon, plunging the slope into deep shadow. Around 6 in the evening, Maciej, Berbeka, and Tomasz Kowalski make it to the highest point. For the 58-year-old veteran, a circle is closed, a long-held ghost finally laid to rest. But the price of this success proves to be devastatingly high. Both climbers are at the absolute limit of human endurance. Young Tomasz's body, lacking experience in adapting to winter on an 8,000er, is sending terrifying signals of total exhaustion. The joy of victory instantly gives way to the chilling horror of the approaching night, as temperatures plummet far below -40 degrees. On the complex rocky ridge during the descent, the group loses visual contact for good. In the pitch black of a winter night at extreme altitude, breaking formation means certain death. Tomasz Kowalski keys his radio. His voice comes over the airwaves, faint and broken. Journalists would later call these radio intercepts a chronicle of a life fading away. The young athlete reports to base camp that he's suffering a complete energy collapse. His body refuses to obey. He's physically unable to take a single step. The phenomenal endurance of an ultramarathon runner shatters against the brutal reality of a high-altitude winter. The transmissions become less and less frequent until the radio fills with a deadening hiss. Meanwhile, Maciej Berbeka is descending in complete radio silence. The experienced rescuer doesn't transmit a single time throughout the night. No one knows for sure what's happening to the veteran in that searing, icy darkness. Mountain guides speculate he became disoriented on the complex terrain. It's likely that in a state of extreme fatigue and zero visibility, he fell into one of the deep, snow-covered crevasses. Winter on Broad Peak silently swallows 2 men in the dark. The Triumph dissolves into the icy wind, leaving behind only broken lines of communication and empty tents at the assault camp. The morning of March 6th descends on base camp with a heavy, oppressive silence. The radios are quiet, the airwaves filled with nothing but static. A Pakistani climber from the support team makes a desperate push upward. He tries to break through the building storm to help his stranded comrades, but the mountain is rapidly slamming its icy trap shut. The weather deteriorates sharply, with hurricane-force winds literally knocking him off his feet, and zero visibility turning the slope into an impenetrable white wall. The rescuer is forced to turn back. Time has finally run out. On March 8th, the expedition leader makes the most difficult decision. The camp is completely dismantled. Maciej Berbeka and Tomasz Kowalski are officially declared dead, lost to the snows of the Karakoram. But the real storm is just beginning, and it's raging far from the peaks of Pakistan. In warm television studios and safe offices, an unprecedented scandal erupts. Society holds a harsh, uncompromising trial at sea level for Adam Bilecki, the team member who descended first and survived. Journalists, experts, and armchair analysts dissect his every move under a microscope. A special commission from the Polish Mountaineering Association publishes a stern report. They openly condemn the moral implications of breaking the rope team apart. In classic mountaineering, the integrity of the group is considered a sacred rule, so abandoning partners for one's own survival sparks a wave of outrage in the sporting community. Months pass, and the summer sun slightly softens the mountain's harsh demeanor. In July of 2013, an incredibly difficult search expedition is organized. The team ascends the familiar route, step by step, piecing together the terrifying picture of that fateful March night. At an altitude of 7,900 meters, they find their answer. The body of the young ultramarathoner, Tomasz Kowalski, is frozen on a narrow rock ridge. The position of his body speaks volumes, confirming the researchers' grim hypothesis. Tomasz sat down to catch his breath and simply lost the ability to get up again. The cause of death was fatal hypothermia and a total energy collapse. His trained body had used up every last drop of its resources. The fate of the highly experienced veteran remains an eternal mystery. The search party meticulously scans the slopes, peering carefully into deep ice crevices. But Maciej Berbeka has vanished without a trace. The great rescuer remains forever in the cold embrace of the mountain he returned to after 25 long years. Only a decade later, in 2023, does Tomasz Kowalski's story find its final chapter. A new group of climbers carefully moves the young athlete's body to a specially prepared ice sarcophagus away from the main route, ensuring he has a dignified final resting place in the eternal snows. The tragedy on Broad Peak leaves behind a heavy legacy, shattering the romantic illusions of team spirit in extreme conditions. A commission can write any rules it wants from the comfort of an office, but the reality above the so-called death zone is dictated by entirely different laws of physiology. The historic 2013 expedition proves one harsh truth, clearly and mercilessly. At 8,000 meters in a winter storm, every person is ultimately on their own. 8 amputated fingers don't stop a Malaysian climber from facing the icy abyss. Ravichandran Tharumalingam stubbornly assaults the highest point on the planet, leaving the sporting community breathless with admiration. His phenomenal endurance and fanatical drive for the summit shatter all conventional notions of human capability. The month is May 2023. Everest is preparing a brutal test for the athlete in the merciless death zone. At a critical altitude, Ravichandran suddenly collapses on the way down. His body completely gives out. He spends over 30 unbearably long hours in the icy trap, completely without oxygen. The air here is so thin that every breath is a searing gasp of cold, surrounded by nothing but an indifferent snowy void. Hope fades with every passing minute until a true miracle occurs. A Sherpa from a completely different expedition happens to spot the freezing man. This guide takes an enormous risk, performing a superhuman feat of physical strength to pull the Malaysian from an altitude people usually don't return from. The impossible rescue is a success, but this stunning story of survival rapidly escalates into a global ethical scandal. The jungle teaches a harsh rule: you either fight or you disappear. Ravichandran Tharumalingam learned this brutal lesson from an early age. He grew up in deep poverty, in a huge family on the very edge of civilization, where the city outskirts bleed into the dense Malaysian forests. The constant lack of resources and the daily competition for survival forged him into a resilient fighter. It was in these conditions that the steel character of the future businessman and celebrated mountaineer was formed. Today, the whole world knows him by the powerful commercial brand, Everest. Until he was 30 years old, he was completely dedicated to football, but the flat, grassy plains quickly bored the ambitious athlete. His soul craved verticality, colossal scale, and the challenge of pushing his limits. Ravi decisively left team sports and discovered a terrifying new world. This was the icy, uncompromising kingdom of high-altitude mountaineering, where entirely different laws of physics apply. On the snow-covered slopes, the price of a mistake isn't measured in points on a scoreboard, but in parts of your own body. The year 2006 became a turning point for Ravi. He successfully set foot on the coveted summit of Everest for the first time. The deafening triumph was intoxicating, but the mountain took its terrible toll. Severe frostbite cost him 2 fingers. For most people, an injury like that would close the path to the top forever. For Ravi, it was just an annoying obstacle on his path to greatness. A year later, in 2007, he stubbornly returned to extreme altitude. There, he was struck by treacherous mountain sickness. Its severe symptoms screamed for an urgent descent, but his colossal ambition completely drowned out the voice of reason. Ravi stubbornly ignored the alarming signals from his weakening body. The outcome was irreversible. Deep tissue frostbite claimed another 8 of his fingers. Sporting commentators confidently wrote him off. His career as a high-altitude climber seemed over. But in 2022, his fans were left in utter astonishment. Deprived of almost all his fingers, Ravi did something absolutely insane. He became the very first Malaysian to conquer the ferocious K2. Experienced guides call this peak the Savage Mountain, as it's technically far more difficult than Everest. The incredible success instantly turned Ravichandran into a living legend in his home country. Loud fame demands constant fuel. His successes in the eternal snows had long since become the solid foundation of his thriving business. Numerous sponsorship deals, public speaking engagements, the perfect image of an unbreakable superhero, all of it was held up exclusively by new records. In 2023, Ravi announced his most ambitious project yet, titled Everest 4.0. He was determined to climb the planet's highest peak for a 4th time. The stakes were now raised to the maximum. Immediately after Everest, he planned to attempt an incredibly difficult traverse, crossing to the neighboring peak of Lhotse in just 24 hours. This would be a colossal load on his exhausted body, and a grueling test of endurance. He meticulously planned the logistics and prepared his sponsors' flags. Ravichandran is laser-focused on the mission, knowing that a massive success in the mountains is the key to monetizing his public image and attracting new investment. May 17, 2023, serves up the perfect picture for the global press. Ravichandran Tharumalingam stands triumphantly on the summit of Everest, greedily gulping the cold air through his oxygen mask. Cameras capture the brilliant moment of absolute triumph. The climber proudly unfurls the Malaysian flag and then carefully smooths out the bright banners bearing the logos of his many corporate sponsors. Back at base camp, sports journalists are already drafting their glowing reports. The grand business plan is a success. The brand is getting a massive boost. But the mountain is starting its own ruthless countdown, and the stopwatch is already running. The descent, as always, holds the deadliest threat for any climber. The very next day, May 18th, victory spirals into disaster. At an altitude of about 8,300 meters, the athlete's exhausted body suddenly suffers a catastrophic failure. Ravi slumps heavily, then collapses completely on a narrow, rocky ledge, surrounded by kilometer-deep abysses. This is the so-called death zone, an extremely hostile environment where atmospheric pressure drops to critical lows. The human body can't recover here. It simply, slowly, breaks down with every passing second. The Malaysian climber's condition deteriorates with terrifying speed. He's rapidly developing high-altitude pulmonary edema. His lung tissue fills with fluid, turning every tiny breath into an agonizing, searing attempt not to drown in the dry air itself. At the same time, severe hypothermia sets in. A piercing, icy storm easily cuts through his multi-layered down suit. The few finger segments Ravi has left after previous tragic climbs are now suffering another deep frostbite. His cells are literally crystallizing from the sub-zero temperatures. He slips into a heavy, semi-conscious state. His muscles give out completely, robbing him of any chance to take even a single step down. In this critical moment, the worst happens. The life-giving gas in his oxygen tanks runs out. The pressure gauge needle drops to 0. The final countdown for his fading consciousness begins. Ravi is left utterly alone on a wind-blasted, icy ledge. He spends more than 30 hours in this horrifying, helpless position. 30 hours of complete stillness in the cosmic cold, one-on-one with the elements. The most chilling part of this chronicle of decline is the indifferent reaction of those around him. Everest during peak commercial season is like a busy highway, but here, the ethical codes are frozen solid. Other groups pass by the freezing man. Climbers in their warm suits trudge upward, continuing their own selfish push for the summit. They look at the motionless body. They see his desperate situation, but no one stops. At 8,000 meters, any delay threatens the lives of the passers-by themselves. For the dozens of people walking past, the dying Ravi becomes just another motionless feature of the lifeless landscape. His last hope melts away, along with the last of his body heat. For 30 long hours, the mountain mercilessly drains the final sparks of life from the Malaysian. And then, just when there are objectively no chances left, Gelje Sherpa appears on the narrow trail. He works for a completely different expedition company and is guiding his client to the summit for a hefty fee. The experienced Nepalese guide's eye happens to catch a barely perceptible movement on the snowy ledge. Gelje moves closer and realizes with utter astonishment the motionless man in front of him, against all the harsh laws of the high mountains, is still breathing. The helicopter's rotor blades slice uselessly through the thin atmosphere. Modern technology is utterly powerless here. At the extreme altitude of 8,300 meters, rescue helicopters physically cannot fly. Their weak engines simply don't have enough atmospheric density to operate. The man freezing on the rock ledge seems doomed, and only a true miracle can save his life. And that miracle is performed by the Nepalese guide. Gelje Sherpa looks at the fading Malaysian and makes the most difficult moral decision of his professional career. Time is slipping away, becoming the ultimate enemy. The guide quickly turns to his ambitious Chinese client. This man has paid a colossal sum for the expedition and is just a few hours away from the summit, the dream of his life. The Nepalese guide begins to desperately persuade him to turn back. To save a complete stranger, they must sacrifice their own triumph. Amazingly, the client nods and agrees. Right then and there, the rescue operation begins, instantly becoming an unprecedented test of human limits. The Nepalese rescuer wraps Ravichandran's limp body tightly in an insulating thermal blanket, creating a secure, protective cocoon. Then, Gelje does the utterly impossible. He carefully hoists the heavy, completely immobile Malaysian onto his back. The torturous descent into the icy hell begins. The Sherpa carries this living weight down 600 meters of sheer vertical terrain. It's an incredibly difficult landscape, composed entirely of sharp rocks, deep snow, and slick ice. Every single step sends waves of searing pain through his straining muscles. The rescuer's lungs burn from the colossal exertion, and his heart pounds at its absolute limit. This superhuman effort continues for 6 grueling hours. Gelje is balancing on the very edge of total exhaustion, but he stubbornly carries his burden toward the safety of a lower camp. Only here, at a safer altitude, can aviation finally join the evacuation. A nimble helicopter expertly snags the injured climber with a special long line and whisks him away from the harsh slopes. His physical survival is 100% guaranteed. It would seem that such an intense story must end with tears of joy and warm, friendly embraces. However, the swift return to civilization opens a completely new, unpleasant chapter in this drama. Ravichandran, now completely safe, immediately returns to his familiar public life. He quickly publishes lengthy posts on social media, eloquently describing his incredible survival experience. The rescued climber generously hands out compliments and thanks to his sponsors, business partners, and even his insurance agents. He actively praises his personal brand and his own phenomenal resilience. And in doing so, the Malaysian completely erases the main hero from his beautiful story. He doesn't mention Gelje Sherpa at all. The public sees not a single word of gratitude for the very man who literally carried him on his back through a blizzard. The global sporting community is baffled and starts asking very uncomfortable questions in the comments. In response, the rescued businessman makes another shocking move. He simply blocks his rescuer's social media account, deleting all mentions of him. This act triggers a global wave of furious outrage. Professional climbers, respected journalists, and everyday people online openly accuse Ravi of flagrant ingratitude and shamelessly stealing another's heroic deed for cheap PR. This whole scandalous situation instantly rips off the pretty masks. The commercial gloss and loud sporting titles immediately lose their artificial weight in the eyes of the public. Ravichandran's high-profile case leaves us all with a crystal-clear lesson. $1,000,000 contracts, high social status, and immense wealth can never replace basic human decency.